Hello everyone, and welcome to November's video essay here on the financial diet. Last month, we talked all about consumerism culture and how our era of hyper-consumerism has changed basically every aspect of the way we live and who we are as people. And as a kind of companion to that video, this month I wanted to dive deep on what I consider to be consumerism culture's evil twin sister, convenience culture.
More robots will be roaming around Austin delivering food.
You know it's going to be a good day when you're having champagne before sunrise.
So we're teaming up with DoorDash.
3, 2, 1. We love Uber Eats. Thanks, guys. How we going?
Now, as it pertains to consumerism culture, the name of the game has become to acquire as much as possible, from our clothes to our skincare to our experiences, without ever worrying about quality or durability or what role these things will play in our lives, or even if they'll make us happy, because spoiler alert, they increasingly don't. And in that video, I briefly mentioned how this proliferation of fast and cheap has made us feel so entitled to convenience. Convenience spending is so pervasive in the average American lifestyle that we're spending thousands of dollars on it per year. A Finder.com survey found that 74% of adults in the US spend an average of $4,073 a year on conveniences like subscription boxes, food deliveries, and ride sharing. And that statistic doesn't even take into account other convenience expenses like same-day and two-day delivery services like Amazon Prime, or how convenience encourages other consumer habits like buying a cute outfit you saw online directly through an influencer's like-to-know storefront. But don't worry, we'll get into that. To speak more on the convenience economy and specifically how it intersects with labor, we dropped in with host of our podcast, Too Good to Be True, journalist, creator, and former union organizer, Sabrina Ryan.
When we talk about the convenience economy, what we're talking about is an industry that employs around 59 million Americans. That's more than a third of the U.S. workforce, including gig work, part-time jobs, freelance services, and contract-based work, facilitated by platforms like Uber, DoorDash, TaskRabbit, Upwork, and all the other apps on our phones. The numbers have skyrocketed, particularly since the COVID-19 pandemic, which forced millions of us to pivot our careers. According to the TransUnion Fall 2024 Gig Economy Report, 37% of all workers reported gig work as their primary source of income, with millennials reporting 55% of us leveraging gig work as our primary source of income. That's a huge jump from the 27% of us that were doing gig work in 2016.
Every day there is a new app or service out there meant to make our lives even more convenient than they already were, thus furthering our collective mindset that our financial and emotional well-being is a problem to solve on an individual level. Because convenience culture is just another aspect of an overall cheap mindset, even though it often costs us just as much or more in the long term. And if we think of convenience culture as only just your average person ordering dinner off of Uber Eats, or as they put it in my beloved meme, hiring a peasant to bring you food, we can see that the convenience mindset at the expense of everything else goes all the way up to the highest earners in our society, with, for example, things like the rise in private jet usage. Quote, as of mid-May 2024, private flying has surged, surpassing pre-pandemic levels seen in 2019 by an impressive 32.1%. Fractional flight providers have seen an increase in flight hours up to 59% in the second quarter of 2024 compared with the same time in 2019. And we don't even have time in this video to get into how incredibly uniquely destructive things like private jet usage are for the world we live in, although this is a great website to give you a good primer on that. And yes, I hate to break it to you Swifties, but your girl is not getting out of this unscathed, because ultimately this video isn't just about billionaires and their habits. But I don't think we can ignore how this rise of convenience culture manifesting in even the highest earners in the world is simply a reflection and an exaggeration of what's happening on the everyday level. Because what we see in the spending habits of the ultra-rich often just boils down to ways to have to remove themselves from inconvenience, yes, but also community, any interaction with other human beings, even a moment of discomfort. And we see the normalization of these same habits at basically every income level. And the ultra-wealthy expressing their convenience culture in things like private jet uses, concierges, secluded 5-star resorts, or my beloved Barbra Streisand's fake shopping mall built in the basement of her home so that she can recreate the shopping experience without having to be around people.
Is there a hot topic down here?
Does still filter into our digital lives and the same apps that we use to see our friends' apartments. Like, I'm not a fan of the Kardashian Jenners. Why have I seen approximately 1,000 photos of them in designer clothes on a private jet? And in the way that we are often marketed to, leveling up professionally, financially, and otherwise is often about stacking these conveniences. You don't have to do your own grocery shopping, you don't have to cook for yourself, you don't have to do your own laundry or your errands, and so on and so forth, until one day you don't even have to fly on a plane with people you don't know. And this is not to say that some of those conveniences can't have meaning in people's lives, or be a very necessary thing, like in the case of, for example, disability. But it would be denialism of the highest order to pretend that the ways in which we are leaning on convenience culture and distancing ourselves from one another and outsourcing almost everything to an app is not still harming us and going way beyond what is actually necessary. And it's also impossible to ignore how removing so many of these everyday social ties and forms of small community, even something as simple as borrowing something from a neighbor or picking someone up at the airport, is directly linked to the current epidemic of isolation that we are experiencing, especially here in America. But let's take it back to the beginning and ask ourselves, how did we get here in the first place? And there are a lot of fingers to be pointed, but I would point first and foremost to Chapter 1, the gig economy, where there's an app for everything. So there are a lot of culprits when it comes to the hyper-conveniencification of our lives, but we simply can't ignore the impact that Uber specifically has had on the world and on our own brains. Founded in 2009 and launched in 2010, Uber was the original ride-hailing app. By April 2014, it was available in 100 cities, and by June 2018, 10 billion Uber trips had been completed. Uber is still the #1 ride-hailing app in the world, with operations in over 900 metropolitan areas as of 2023, and according to Fortune Business Insights, the global ride-sharing market size was $106.66 billion in 2023 and is projected to grow from $123.8 billion in 2024 to $480.9 in 2032. And the rise of Uber happened simultaneously with other companies providing similar app-based services in other verticals, and some arguably heavily influenced by the Uber model. Grocery delivery service Instacart was founded in 2012, TaskRabbit, previously Run My Errand, began in 2008 and rebranded in 2010, food delivery service DoorDash was founded in 2013, with Uber Eats following closely behind in 2014, and competitor Grubhub already existed but didn't start offering delivery until 2014. And one could make the argument that the rise of Uber/rideshare apps have been good for the economy because, according to a study led by the consultancy firm Public First, US-based app rideshare and delivery services generated $32 billion in additional revenue for restaurants, grocers, and other local businesses, and saved consumers 1.05 billion hours and produced $11 billion in consumer surplus. So yes, restaurants can expand their business by offering delivery on DoorDash, but if you're wondering to yourself, well, these are really good numbers, what would be the problem with all of these apps? The answer is that the model of many of these companies is not to ensure that the maximum benefits go to the companies that are selling their products through them, like restaurants, or the workers who are providing the labor, like the people driving Ubers, or even the overall marketplace that they're disrupting, like, for example, taxi drivers. It is to completely revolutionize these entire models, how we eat, how we get around, how we even think about the things that we're buying, to benefit executives and shareholders at the cost of everyone else. Because let's be clear, there may be an app for everything, but not for everyone. To hear more about the impact of apps and the gig economy on small and local businesses, we spoke with Celeste Lopriado, a small business owner and founder of the Conscious Farm Kitchen.
So the Conscious Farm Kitchen, we do farm-to-table meal delivery. And we deliver basically like completely fresh, ready-to-eat meals right to customers' doors. Our main focus is in being organic, plant-based, gluten-free, and then we also kind of tie in a lot of sustainability principles. So we have a reusable container program, and then we also offer compostable containers that are fully biodegradable. And also, the pinnacle of our business is like locally sourced seasonal ingredients. So yeah, myself and my team, we prep, cook, package, and deliver all of the meals ourselves. So we're not using any like third-party apps like Uber Eats. We kind of do all of that work on our end. And yeah, the bulk of our customers are like young and middle-aged moms who work full-time. A lot of them work like in the tech industry. Or, a lot of them are teachers, a lot of them are, just kind of have really busy jobs that keep them limited when it comes to time, especially like making lunches, making dinners. So that's kind of where we come in. And then we also have a lot of, like, I would say ethical values. So we're an above living wage employer. So our lowest employees paid $32 an hour, which is really unlike the rest of the food industry. We also offer health benefits. Yeah, and I identify as mixed race Black person. I'm queer. I'm a woman, obviously, and I started this business when I was 22, which was 6 years ago. So I kind of have a unique perspective starting this business kind of super young, and also, again, like a minority in this industry. I started the business about a year before COVID kind of started. So the landscape was definitely a lot different. So there were things like Uber Eats available, and there were definitely things, like HelloFresh and those kind of other meal prep services, but especially in like the kinds of places we deliver. So we are about 2 hours outside Toronto, but we deliver to a lot of medium and small cities kind of surrounding Toronto. So a lot of those places didn't even have like Uber Eats yet, or it was like super limited. So, a lot of our customers didn't really have access to that at that point. So getting like our meals delivered was definitely a unique selling feature. But again, when we started, we were really small. We mostly got customers from word of mouth, and we only had about, 20 to 30 customers a week. We weren't doing any marketing. So things were really different for us. And then I would say in the last like 2.5 years, we've definitely been growing significantly, both from want and need. And we've started relying on things like ads, on Meta and Google. We've started to find, all of our new customers basically that way. And we're directly competing with companies like HelloFresh, Factor, Chef's Table, I think. And definitely noticing like a huge, I guess like barrier there. So, those large companies are able to put so much money into their ads, that they, just pop up like all over Google as soon as you type in like meal delivery. So it's super hard to compete in the ad space. And then also just like overall, they have so much money behind them that they're able to offer like discounts and prices that aren't really normal. Like they're basically, like sinking their costs in order to acquire new customers, which is something like we're not able to do at that scale. And even they can offer things like free delivery, which we can't offer, or just bonuses and add-ons, just to get customers to buy that first time or the first few times. And I think customers don't really understand like why we aren't able to offer things like that. They obviously don't know like the cost behind that, and they don't understand the added costs that we have as a small business and, lack of funding. So I think there's just a big disconnect between, the customers not knowing the differences that we're facing and then kind of lumping us all together. So just probably picking whatever's the cheapest or whatever appeals to them the most.
So let's start by talking about that saving consumers over 1 billion hours annually statistic. It sounds like a really good metric, and we at TFD certainly talk a lot about your time being just as valuable as your money. But that valuing of time is a double-edged sword. If you value your own time more than anyone else's, other people are going to be paying the price. Offloading tasks onto someone else isn't saving time spent on those tasks, it just means that someone else is doing it. 1 billion hours of some people's time means that there are other people working those billion hours. And gig jobs are all about the hours you put in. It's not like an office job where as long as you get all of your work done, you probably won't feel any consequences, even if you spend some of your workday idly scrolling. You literally have to keep working in order to earn money, and if you want to earn more, you simply have to work more. And when it comes to saving consumers money, the model for a lot of these companies to, for example, saturate markets and take share away from pre-existing models like ride shares over taxis is to falsely deflate the prices initially so that their products are more appealing, and through their external funding they are able to take those initial losses and then subsequently only raise the prices once they get enough market share to dominate the space. You might be most familiar with this in the context of, for example, Airbnb, which used to be a pretty financially interesting alternative to staying at a hotel, and now just basically means paying $400 a night to stay in a place where you're also expected to take out the trash, strip the bed, and wash all of your dishes. This is a complete side note, but I saw a Reddit thread the other day about a person who was staying in a Airbnb where the owner had kept the thermostat at 65 degrees and removed the interface to be able to change the temperature. And yes, that person should be put in one of those old-fashioned medieval stocks and we should be able to throw rotten fruit at them. But also, like, how did we get here, Airbnb? Like, wherefore art thou, original Airbnb? Because we are, at this point, paying to degrade ourselves while traveling. I say this as I'm literally about to stay at an Airbnb, but to be fair, I'm staying in a group and we need a kitchen. Anyway, I wish I knew how to quit you, Airbnb. We have a dog. It's a whole thing. Anyway. And it's not just the financial models that are being disrupted, it's also the labor models, because more and more Americans are working gig jobs. This is usually contracted, unprotected third-party work for what often used to be full-time positions. As of 2023, Gallup estimates that gig work is the primary job for 29% of all workers in the US. This includes a quarter of all full-time workers and half of all part-time workers, including multiple job holders. 36% have a gig work arrangement in some capacity, and over half of gig workers do not have access to employer-based benefits. Now, gig jobs can be great for padding out income, especially if you're looking to expand your income in a relatively short period of time or for specific financial goals. But generally speaking, they are not sustainable as full-time positions, in part because they were never designed to be. Just look at what Uber drivers are making. According to a 2023 article in the New York Times, quote, Josh Gold, a spokesman for Uber, said that its drivers remain busy by any metric and that their earnings have increased significantly in recent years. Uber drivers now earn an average of $33 an hour before tips, up from $23.50 per hour in 2018, according to Uber data. But the inflation rate as of last fall, triple what it was 4 years ago, has possibly canceled out some of those wage increases. Last summer, the cost of food in the city was up by 9% over the previous year. And thanks to a lawsuit, Uber is now required to offer paid sick leave, paid time off, and other benefits, although still no retirement benefits, to drivers in New York after it was determined that they were cheating drivers out of wages. But that's still not true in most of their markets, and it's pretty disgusting to contrast that with the quite generous benefits by American standards offered to Uber's corporate employees, which range from 18 weeks of parental leave to a 4-week sabbatical after 5 years of employment. It's also worth noting that, according to a lot of drivers on the ground, even the estimates for driver wages seem very inflated. And according to the National Institute for Workers' Rights, protections that are commonly denied to gig workers include things like unemployment insurance, workers' comp, social security or retirement, disability benefits, health insurance, paid medical leave, overtime pay, minimum wage, the right to unionize, anti-discrimination protections, and occupational safety protections.
Like, I feel so much like pressure at that point. So, even us, like, we've struggled a lot with keeping wages high, paying staff, like it's always tight. There's been lots of times where I haven't been able to pay myself even for like up to 6 months at a time just to maintain wages. This year, like with the economy being the way it is, I've noticed a lot of customers have been ordering less, spending less. It's harder to acquire new customers. I actually had to lay off 2 employees earlier this month or last month, which was the first time I've ever had to do that. And it does feel like it's getting tighter and tighter, when it comes to that. So I totally understand why other businesses feel like they can't maintain it. And, our business is super unique and privileged in that we have less expenses. We don't pay rent for a commercial space. We, own our own delivery vehicle, which I bought before the pandemic when interest rates were really low. And it's really affordable. We kind of are offering a high-end service to wealthy customers so our customers can pay more. I think like it's such a deep issue. And it's not as easy as restaurants should just pay their staff more because there's no money. Like there's really no money in it.
And all of this is not even addressing what happens to the previous workers from the markets that were disrupted. For example, here in New York City, there have been huge numbers of taxi driver protests, even unfortunately things like this, which I can't even say on the video for fear of it getting flagged, because of how much devaluing the wages, benefits, and worker protections in industries like this affect even the people who used to have it. Again, a lot of the reason why companies like Uber were able to get such huge market share in the first place is because they started by falsely depressing their cost to a degree that pre-established workers, like taxi drivers, could never compete with. Not because they weren't being efficient, because those costs were never meant to be real in the first place.
The value of work in 2024 is no longer measured by skill or commitment, but by how cheaply it can be done. A shift that's painfully obvious in the freelance market, where platforms like Upwork and Fiverr have normalized global competition. A graphic designer in the US competing against counterparts from countries with lower living costs sees a bidding war push their rates down to unsustainable levels. In 2019, the Freelancers Union reported that 57% of independent workers have experienced a reduction in fees as companies capitalize on the global talent pool. I can guarantee you that has gotten worse in 5 years, especially since COVID. Major companies like Google and Meta are increasingly relying on contract workers to fill roles traditionally held by salaried employees. In fact, Google's shadow workforce of temporary workers and independent contractors outnumber its direct employees. Why pay for a full-time developer with benefits when you could hire a contractor for a fraction of the cost? They don't. So where does this leave unions? The push for unionization in the gig economy has faced significant roadblocks. Organizing efforts like those of Gig Workers Rising and Rideshare Drivers United have faced intimidation tactics, algorithmic retaliation like deactivations, and legal challenges. Even when workers manage to unionize, enforcement of protections is almost impossible. A great example is the Amazon Labor Union, which made headlines in 2022 for securing a victory at a Staten Island Amazon warehouse. However, since then, Amazon has poured resources into legal battles to delay or reverse union certification. This approach, exhausting unions through drawn-out litigation, isn't unique to just Amazon. They know how hard it is for scattered freelancers in particular to organize. It's a strategy that the gig economy giants have borrowed and perfected, and it makes me sick. Unionizing a workforce in and of itself is like an additional part-time job for those workers. If you have children or any other responsibilities, you can still support unionization efforts and you can probably contribute. But who can expect you to be able to accomplish what dozens of overpriced lawyers can? In New York City, a 2023 law mandated that by 2025, app-based delivery workers would have a wage of $19.96 an hour. This was a really hard victory to get, but we got it. And it is one that shows incremental changes are possible. But each of these attempts is met with its own fierce resistance from companies. And they're all uphill battles. But as customers, we need to recognize the hidden costs of this. That $12 burger delivered to your door might come with a human cost that goes way beyond the delivery fee. The worker bringing it to you may be uninsured, underpaid, and struggling to make ends meet, even as they shoulder all of the risks and none of the benefits of this. And on top of that, it's usually snowing or something, and many people dehumanize workers like delivery workers when they're quickly and often interacting with them. To change this, we need public pressure, legislative action, and solidarity. Those factors can and have caused lawmakers to prioritize this issue, with states like New Jersey exploring stricter worker classification laws. Still, the power imbalance is stark.
And so much of this model also relies on tips, a topic that we'll be getting into in a future video. Because while many of us can, and arguably should, if we can afford it, choose to be an outstanding tipper, great tippers here and there are not going to move the needle for a person who is working gigs that ultimately require more and more hours in order to actually increase their income or achieve financial stability. Because it's simply more of the American same, requiring Americans on one or more of the lowest rungs of the economic ladder to take full personal responsibility for their financial success, even when so much, like how well tips are going to be on any given day regardless of performance, is beyond their control. But speaking of having finances beyond your control, we need to talk about millennials and convenience spending in the face of an unprecedented economy. Which brings us to Chapter 2, Outsourcing Adulthood, aka the entitled generation. Now, if you were online in the early 2010s like I was, hell, I even famously wrote a book in 2012 that was very much along these lines, you remember the endless talk of adulting. Who knew that there was this this much content to mine from the fact that we couldn't do taxes. And for many financial talking heads, this phenomenon of adulting was simply a sign that millennials and now Gen Z after us were simply part of a more entitled generation. That we were stuck in a state of arrested development where even the most basic tasks felt out of our reach and not like something we should have to deal with. Now, we have frequently defended millennials and Gen Z on this channel because despite their reputation as lazier or more entitled than previous generations, they have ultimately been dealt a tougher hand with wage stagnation, the student loan crisis, etc., and according to many studies, do actually work equivalent or more hours. Often because they have to hold down multiple jobs to make the same amount of money, boomers. Okay? It's not the world anymore where we just go into the chair building factory and we're like, I'm gonna sweep floors, I'll do it for free, and then we do that, and then 30 years later, we're the president of the chair making factory and we're in an office in a pinstripe suit with a cigar and a thing of scotch. That world doesn't exist anymore, baby. But it simply would be false to claim that millennials and Gen Z don't spend more on convenience than older generations, at least in some respects. For example, food and grocery delivery being a huge one. According to DoorDash, in the US, 47% of Gen Z in the US and 39% of millennials are ordering more delivery compared to only 26% of Gen X or baby boomers. And according to Payment Intelligence's How the World Does Digital study, which surveyed more than 67,000 consumers across 11 countries, accounting for nearly half the world's GDP about their digital habits, 15% of consumers use online grocery subscriptions each week, a share that nearly doubled to 28% for Gen Z. Similarly, a comparable 25% of millennials engage with these services each week. In contrast, only 12% of Gen X and 4% of baby boomers do the same. And here's the thing, as always in this channel, we are not here to blame people, we are here to rethink things. Because even if we accept the premise that often millennials and Gen Z are having to engage in convenience culture more because they are often, as I mentioned, having to work longer hours for the same amount of money, which is true, or because both parents in a household are having to work outside the household while raising a child, which is also true, it's important that we step back and see if a lot of this convenience culture is not keeping us locked into the same cycle that requires us to work those additional hours in the first place. Here's a quote from an article we shared on the TFD website back in 2018 titled, "PSA, Millennials feel like kids because we can't afford to be adults." Quote, "I'm 27 and I still don't feel like I have achieved the adulthood I always envisioned for myself. But maybe part of the reason is that I've never been able to afford to live like an adult. Maybe we're all trying to be adults in a system that is no longer built for us to do so. Compared to my own parents, I have more debt, I pay far more in housing and transportation costs, and I make way less money. That means I'll save less, marry and have kids later, and delay things like buying a house and aggressively saving for retirement. And as someone who's always been told that adulthood means a home of your own, a family, and career stability, that's a very hard pill to swallow." And it's now 6 years later, but this sentiment still applies to many people in our generation. From National Geographic, quote, "Even in the early 2000s, social scientists noticed that the eldest millennials weren't hitting the typical markers of finishing education, getting jobs, getting married, and having kids," says Karen Fingeman, a professor of human development at UT Austin and director of the Texas Aging and Longevity Consortium. 24 years later, we're continuing to delay both marriage and childbearing. Research shows that the percentage of today's adults aged 30 to 34 who are married is down more than 10% over the last 2 decades. That means age of first motherhood in 2021 was also 27.3, the highest it's ever been. And another recent Pew poll found that 44% of non-parent adults aged 18 to 49 plan to stay that way. And financial pressures are affecting the timing of these milestones. A 2024 report from the National Association of Realtors found that a third of older millennials owe over $40,000 in student loans, and that we delay buying homes primarily because of both that debt and high rental costs, which prevent us from saving for a down payment. And listen, choosing not to get married or to do it later or to not have kids is certainly not a bad thing. I'm coming at you live as a woman who doesn't want kids. But the problem is when we don't have those same choices. And this only gets worse when convenience culture is offering us false solutions to these problems. Because I'd like to echo an argument that I made in our Gen Z becoming the buy everything, own nothing generation video. When you are feeling existentially anxious about the world around you and your long-term prospects, it is normal and natural to grab onto the areas of control and convenience that you do have. And if the world is telling you you'll never meet the milestones of adulthood, why wouldn't you lean into the small luxuries that you know are going to make your day, at least in the exact moment you enjoy them, slightly better? But here's the thing, and we'll get into this more in a later chapter here, often when we are prioritizing our own convenience, it is coming directly at the expense of someone else. So even if you are going to justify doing things like ordering takeout again because you'll never be able to afford afford a down payment, you probably shouldn't be doing that during a blizzard where someone is going to be risking their life to deliver it to you. Because this is where convenience and entitlement culture erode our ability to even have empathy. According to DoorDash's own internal data, 49% of people said that they were more likely to order delivery during bad weather.
In the last probably like 6 months, I've noticed like such a rise in that kind of behavior of entitled customers. We don't get too many like direct complaints about cost, although I know that's definitely, a thing that's turning people away. But I would say like the complaints are more around other things that are kind of directly tied to some of these big companies. Like again, the customizations that I noted, like they want endless ability to customize, and they just will do things like write in the comments, like sub this with this, even though that wasn't an option when they were ordering. Just kind of like expecting us to follow through on it. Also, like delivery windows, some of these companies, they have like super tight delivery windows. So with Uber Eats, I mean, you're getting your order in like 20 minutes and you can track the van and you can, know exactly where it is and when it's coming. So a lot of customers have high expectations about, our delivery windows and knowing exactly where their delivery is and when it's going to come and requesting it come at a certain time when that's not feasible for us to accommodate. And then also like delivering the actual product, I think some people expect that it's going to come in like an insulated box with dry ice, because that's what they're used to. And like, that's not what we're delivering in, obviously. Like, and we try to message that people need to be home or they need to leave out a cooler for us so we can like drop off their food. But people just have no regard. Like it'll be pouring rain and they won't even be home and they'll somehow expect us to like find a place to put their food. Or likewise, like in the summer heat, they're just like expecting it to be able to last outside for like 8 hours. So some of those like really direct comparisons between what they're used to and what we're actually able to provide.
Like, it is not normal that every time there's like hurricane force rain in New York City or snow 3 feet tall or like some other horrible inclement weather event that I am seeing like the most marginalized people in New York City having to like go back and forth on these little electric bikes, delivering people their pizza or their pho or their crumble cookies or whatever the hell else they were ordering. Like, we seriously have achieved such a high level of brain rot if we think that that is the time that we need to be outsourcing our labor to someone. But it is impossible to talk about the ways in which convenience culture have altered our perception of what we're entitled to without talking about Amazon Prime. Which brings us to Chapter 3, Amazon Prime and the Tyranny of Free Shipping. Now, Amazon has simply become a ubiquitous part of American life and increasingly life outside of our borders. Amazon Prime and its infamous 2-day and sometimes 1-day free shipping subscription launched in 2005, initially offering an annual subscription fee of $79, the price has increased several times over, currently sitting at $139 annually with monthly membership options available. The Amazon Prime app has long been one of the top downloaded shopping apps, ranking 3rd behind Shein and Temu in 2023. A real rogues gallery, which is still quite notable considering how many people already had the app downloaded. In 2023, quote, Amazon Prime hits their fastest Prime speeds ever in a quarter, with more than 300 million items available with free Prime shipping and tens of millions of the most popular items available with free same-day or one-day delivery. The membership perks have also eroded over time. Prime Video used to be an ad-free perk for members, but now videos play with limited ads unless you shell out an additional $2.99 a month on top of your membership. One interesting tidbit is that the company doesn't provide its corporate employees with free Prime accounts because they assume everyone would already have it anyway. Jeff Bezos not beating the evil overlord allegations yet again, I fear. But what exactly is the trade-off for free, almost literally instant shipping? So free shipping can be a nice perk, and I would be lying if I said I never used Amazon. I do, I have, although drastically less now than I used to. If I use it less, I might want to do the math on whether or not it's worth it. I'm getting a report from the person behind the camera that I may want to do the math on whether or not it's still worth it. I think it probably still is. My husband's very on top of those sort of calculations, but food for thought. I also don't want to be putting more money into Jeff Bezos's pocket so that he can keep sticking his head into the bowling ball buffer that he does every morning. Because does all of this free shipping actually save Americans money? I'm honestly kind of doubtful. And why might that be? Because it makes us order way more than we otherwise would have. Like, that's how this business model works. They're not just doing something for the love of the game. They're doing it because they know that giving you a deal in the short term leads you to spend way more in the long term. Because the average household in America makes 71 Amazon orders in a year. And free shipping is a huge part of the cycle of encouraging us to order more than we ever have before, and definitely more than we need, especially if there's a threshold we need to meet in order to enact it. With services like Amazon Prime being so ubiquitous, we feel like shipping should be free, and we often make a fuss when it's not available. From a Vox article called "The Awful American Consumer," quote, 30 years ago, people were generally fine with whatever they ordered off of the television arriving in 5 to 7 business days because it was the status quo. Now, thanks to Amazon, even 2 days can feel like an eternity. Susan Strasser, a historian of American consumer culture, stressed that the consumer expectations in the US are a corporate creation. She pointed to the example of the mail order business in the late 19th and early 20th century, brought about by companies such as Sears and Montgomery Ward. Previously, most people relied on a lot of things that were locally produced, often by people that they knew. When they were able to order by mail from catalogs sent to their homes, the whole system changed. What it meant was that everything that American manufacturing was producing was available to people, she said. That kind of consumption, that kind of distribution, that kind of merchandising coincided with an avalanche of stuff.
Yeah, it seems like, very few people like leave their house to do any shopping anymore. There's Amazon where they're ordering everything from grocery delivery, Uber Eats for like restaurants and takeout. And not only does that like inhibit community connection, but it also like forcibly closes local stores and restaurants, and makes like downtowns ghost villages or just downtowns with only like chains. Especially like a lot of the communities around me, I've noticed like so much turnover in storefronts, so many chains coming in to places that used to be like local cafes or local restaurants, local bookstores. There's like really a big change in that. And interestingly, like I actually live in a really small town rurally. I moved here a few years ago from a big city, and it's interesting because, I know the people who work at the grocery store. Like I know the people who work at the hardware store. I know the place, I buy like soap and candles and like home things from like a local store. So I actually have that like connection with people selling things, which is pretty rare for most people these days. And, a lot of people, even in my small town, are getting everything they need from Amazon. So it's dying out even in places like this. But the saddest thing again is like the turnover in the storefronts, and all just because people want immediacy and they want to pay as cheap as possible, and they're not willing to pay the extra 10% to get it from somewhere locally. And that's kind of part of why I didn't start a retail business. Like, or even around the time I started, like a lot of these things were becoming really popular, and I kind of saw this as an opportunity to like bridge small business and convenience together.
And the impact of this mindset shift, going from the revolution of catalogs over 100 years ago to the revolution of almost instant shipping, has not gone unnoticed by smaller businesses who struggle to compete with new expectations. Because the reality is, for the most part, they literally can't imitate what Amazon is doing unless they join forces with the beast. From an article in More Perfect Union, quote, "In a typical Ponzi scheme, a company promises investors exceptional returns. The returns aren't paid with profit from business activities, but with money from newer investors. In this version, Amazon promises small business owners and prospective entrepreneurs a path towards economic independence, only to quickly find that Amazon uses its power to pit small firms against each other, enticing or forcing firms to spend more and more money with the company. That control manifests itself with higher and higher FBA fees. According to research from ISLR in 2021, $34.5 of every $100 sold through FBA went directly to Amazon. That's an increase of nearly 81% in under a decade. A survey of over 900 companies from the same organization showed that 62% said it wasn't possible to build a successful brand on Amazon. And Amazon and other big tech companies are working overtime to make sure that they continue monopolizing their markets. According to Bloomberg, in the first 3 months of 2022, the 4 technology giants, Amazon, Google, Apple, and Meta, identified antitrust regulation as their top legislative priority. authority. So far, they've spent $16.7 million to defeat it, and technology industry trade groups spent upwards of $22 million on television advertising during one single week in May.
There is that lack of connection between our customers and us that maybe other small businesses have. So especially being online, it might be hard for people to even know that we are a small business. We try our best to put that forward, on our About Us pages and our social media, but some customers are not even interacting with our social media and not really interacting with those other pages on our website. So they're kind of just going straight to ordering, meaning that they are, again, think that we're a larger company than we actually are. And the biggest thing I've noticed is we just don't have the ability to provide the same customer service. So some of these other companies, they have hundreds of people probably just ready to answer phones, ready to answer emails, customer service wise.
And this isn't even getting into things like Alexa, which allow you to order things on a moment's notice without even having to press a button anymore. We've become conditioned to depend on companies like Amazon, even when we know how bad they are for things like the environment or labor practices or our own psychology, or how devastating they can be to small businesses. And Amazon knows this and also knows that it can continue to charge more for things like free shipping, because that instant gratification hasn't just become a want, it's become a consumer expectation. I'm not a parent, so rarely do parenting maxims flow down to me, but I did hear one recently that was what you give your child, they will eventually come to want, and then to expect, and then to need, which I thought was really interesting in the context of full-ass adults and our consumer habits, and that is essentially exactly what Amazon has done to our brains. We are Jeff Bezos's baby, unfortunately, and he has given us too many lollipops. But if we're going to talk about instant gratification, we cannot skip Chapter 4, The Rise and the Curse of Tap to Pay. Now, Amazon has undeniably influenced our relationship with spending. It lures us in with false convenience and speed and artificially deflated sticker prices to encourage us to spend more and to rely on their services. And all of that has deeply lowered the bar in terms of what needs to be deemed worth it to hit the purchase button. But working hard to erode the already paper-thin firewall between us and the things we want to buy is the rise of tap-to-pay integrations. With things like the TikTok or Instagram shop, for example, it's easier than ever to spend money whenever and wherever you want to. You can see an outfit on an influencer, buy it directly through their link, and get it within a few days, if not sooner. And surprise, tap to pay ultimately causes us to spend more. Quote, in a recent paper based on data from a Chinese bank, researchers found that customers charged 9.4% more on average to their credit cards through both online and in-person transactions after they adopted a mobile payment method than they had before. Given the paper's findings and surveys showing that about half the US population uses mobile payments, the author estimates that approximately 4.5% of total credit card usage in the country is due to the influence of frictionless payments. That means she calculates that about $50 billion of the $1.13 trillion in current consumer credit card debt can be attributed to the ease that mobile payment apps present. And even the phrase frictionless payments itself is extremely telling. When spending money is so intangible and so integrated into what we were already doing, you don't even feel the sting of that money disappearing from your account. And if it's in the case of a credit card, for example, that money was never even in your account to begin with. This is why cash-only budgeting and money cleanses have so long been a staple of the personal finance world and something that we have recommended at least as a reset multiple times. Because it's not just about feeling the physical impact of money leaving your wallet, it's also about eliminating all of the various points of entry to your money that technology has created without us even realizing it. If we're no longer able to shop online or just tap our phone or credit card or even shop within our social media apps, so much of what we'd be spending on day to day is automatically removed. And while convenience culture has so clearly reduced the impact of our spending to the point that we barely even feel it anymore, which has led to all kinds of consequences for those of us who are stuck in these consumer debt cycles, or at minimum are overspending, which again, to my earlier point, is often driving us to have to work more, these things are almost always positioned as being in the interest of of the consumer or helping them. It's not just that you basically never have to have cash, you also don't have to physically type in your credit card information into your computer or even pull out a credit card if you're on the go. We think these are solutions to the hassles of spending, but shouldn't spending money kind of be a hassle? Because if you're going to part with such a valuable resource, because lest we forget, money isn't just money, it is also a direct representation of your time, your effort, your labor, shouldn't you be clear about what you're spending on and why? These apps are capitalizing on our desire for and our expectation of convenience, and these companies don't care about making your lives easier, they care about making you spend as much as possible. And while yes, we all do have the ability to rethink our spending and set boundaries on how money can leave our accounts, and we encourage you guys to do that all the time, we also have to be aware of how much the world around us is working against intentionality. It also works against community. For example, with the rise of completely invisible spending, where everything we're buying comes to us in a matter of days, if not hours, from some anonymous warehouse, we no longer meet the people who make what we're buying or even own the businesses selling it. We haven't just eliminated any inconvenience, we've eliminated basically any connection. And in the case of things like Amazon and One Tap, often the victims are small businesses who literally just can't compete. It's really hard for the clothing boutique in your hometown to integrate seamlessly into Instagram, for example, or to offer you same-day shipping. But on the flip side, the other victim of convenience culture, as we mentioned previously, are the people providing that convenience. Which brings us to our final chapter. Who actually pays for convenience? As I discussed in our chapter on the gig economy, time being spent on tasks isn't being erased by convenience, it's just being outsourced. And so much of convenience and app culture is built on a foundation of underpaying and overworking immigrant labor. According to data from the consulting firm McKinsey, quote, because there are low barriers to entry for some types of gig work, such as delivering passengers, takeout food, or packages, it is perhaps not surprising that less economically established people typically take on this work. Nearly half of all immigrants report being independent workers, underscoring that gigs and freelance jobs are a gateway to the labor market in the United States. Also, it's like classic McKinsey to describe being caught in a cycle of gig work as a gateway into the labor market, but I digress. It's also worth noting that Black and Latino workers are also heavily overrepresented in gig work. Quote, Black workers are 12.1% of the workforce, but 23% of in-person app workers. Latino workers are 16.6% of the workforce, but 18.5% of in-person app workers. Combined, Black and Latino workers comprise less than 29% of the workforce, but almost 42% of workers on apps like Uber, Handy, Postmates, and Amazon Flex. And surprise, surprise, when workers are underpaid, there's no oversight or benefits, no labor protections, and often no HR, and there's also no union, and they couldn't afford to organize even if there were, they're not in a position to combat any mistreatment from employers or even customers. According to NIWR, quote, companies are misclassifying workers at an alarming rate, putting profits and cost savings ahead of workers' rights. In 2009, pharmaceutical company Merck sold its factory in Philadelphia, and the new owner fired all 400 Merck employees and rehired them as independent contractors. And when the country most needed these workers to continue their jobs, they were most at risk. Quote, a survey conducted by University of California, Santa Cruz of app-based gig workers in the San Francisco Bay Area during the COVID-19 pandemic reported 15% of gig workers receive some form of public assistance, including 13% of food delivery workers who depend on food stamps. 45% reported that they couldn't handle a $400 emergency without borrowing money. An estimated 20% of drivers were losing money to drive given their other expenses, and gig workers were asked to bear additional health risks with no healthcare benefits. Given all of this, that meme we talked about earlier with the quote middle-class American as kind of a, medieval king rolling around on the couch, thinking to himself that he's going to order a servant to deliver himself food is really not that far off. And as I mentioned in the intro, a lot of this convenience is a direct replacement for what used to be forms of community. Rather than just hailing a rideshare app for a trip to the airport, you might ask someone you know. Rather than order something off of an anonymous delivery app, you might actually visit a local restaurant or cook at home with friends and family. Almost any number of day-to-day activities have been outsourced to people with whom we have no relation, and as we discussed earlier, often very little empathy. And even leaving aside all of the huge costs that removing having so many forms of connection creates for us, it's also worth noting that these are people to whom we don't feel we owe anything. We're not concerned for their protection or their well-being the way we would someone in our actual communities. We tend to view these people, intentionally or not, as the sort of anonymous, faceless force that props up, supports, and enables so many aspects of our lives, and often, through hyper-inflated convenience pricing, keep us all trapped in a cycle where we are spending more while being falsely given the impression of saving. At the end of the day, just like hyper-consumerism is not going to make us happier, neither is hyper-convenience. Convenience culture is worsening the feedback loop of isolation, fueling our loneliness epidemic, and constantly leaving us dissatisfied because it's hyper-inflated our perception of what we should be able to buy and how we should be able to get it. And this is true on a much larger scale than just apps. Look at the history of our interstate highway system and the suburbanization of America that's turned us into such a car-dependent society. Not for nothing, but ride apps like Uber have claimed to be a part of the solution to car culture, stating that their presence has contributed to a decrease in cars on the road. Another company trying to propose a capitalist solution, making it easier to hail a cab, to a societal problem, car dependency, that would be much better served by a policy change, aka cheap and accessible public transportation. And it's also worth noting that even this claim has been refuted. A study from researchers at Carnegie Mellon found that, quote, people ditching cars when Uber and Lyft came to town may be counterbalanced by people who buy cars so that they can drive for these services. And this undoubtedly occurs on some scale. Uber was even offering a loan program, an extremely sketchy and ethically dubious one, so that people who couldn't afford a car could start driving for it. Other drivers were purchasing vehicles that qualified as Uber Black or XL so that they could earn higher fares. And we were warned about this from an article in 2013, quote, car sharing still relies on a 2-ton hunk of metal that burns old dinosaurs to get people from one place to another. These machines require that cities be built in certain ways to accommodate them. Even in a future where autonomous Uber deliveries become the norm, these vehicles will need a curb to pull up to, or a parking lot to stop in, or large highways to reach their destinations. And we have plenty of data to show that the more time we spend in our cars, the less happy and healthy we are, and as we've said in many videos, a long commute could take literal years off our lives. And ironically, in more healthy forms of convenience, like affordable, accessible, reliable public transit, we would actually be in more contact with each other. We could visit more communities and loved ones. We could travel more easily. Like, we could be living in the future, guys. Like, we'll never get high-speed rail in this country, but we will have a million ways to have, like, a donut delivered to you at 3 in the morning.
I think, other small businesses like ours exist that are thinking about that convenience factor, especially for, our demographic is young women who a lot of them have kids and time is like super limited, and I really understand that. So that's important when you're thinking about starting a business is, like offering that. And I also like have been able to maintain that personal connection to people. So even, through emails, I'm able to connect with people. I learn about like a lot of crazy things happening in their lives. Like people have emailed me, about losing their job or about their partner like ending up with like a serious condition so they can't work anymore, and all of the ways that like our meals are helping them. And that's even translated to in person. Like a lot of our customers will run into me at community events, or we'll just be in a restaurant and I'll recognize a customer from delivering to them a few weeks before. So there's still that like great connection in person. But yeah, I think what people kind of need to remember is how important that is in their lives. And I do think people are feeling like the loss of connection to other people, and where you purchase your goods and services is a huge factor in, connecting in everyday life. Running your errands is like a huge time suck, and it's like a huge part of your weekend or your evening. So being able to connect with people while you're doing that can bring so much like joy back into your life. Yeah, and I think customers just need to like remember to balance like both sides. So I understand, there's times in your life, or there's certain aspects of your life that just need things to be as convenient as possible, but maybe there's room in other places where you can incorporate some of that locality and small business back into the way you're purchasing. And also just be realistic in like what to expect from local businesses, and prioritize, a few extra dollars, or understand that there might be mistakes and hiccups that come along with working with small businesses, because we're not just machines like the big corporate companies.
In the end, just like the consumerism culture we discussed last month, convenience culture has sold us a lie. That by giving us more to buy and more efficient ways to buy it, we will become happier, and in the case of convenience, often buy back our own time. But we find that often this really isn't true, and more importantly, what it does in the meantime is fill our lives with things we really don't need, which we then, spoiler alert, have to spend our precious time working to afford. It's not to say we can never engage with it. Lord knows I do from time to time, like everyone else. I'm certainly not above ordering delivery. But it's worth looking at our habits and seeing just how much convenience is actually costing us. As always, guys, this has been one of our TFD video essays, and I will see you back here next month for a brand new one. Bye, guys.